Okay, good. I'm not hearing properly, so I'm good.
The mortality rates were a reflection of the physical demands of sugar cultivation itself.
It's showing properly, yes?
You can get a sense of what it must have been like by visiting the fields of the Wales Plantation today. This is a scene that really hasn't changed since the 18th century. I've got a collection of old prints from old Victorian and Georgian newspapers that show the harvesting of sugarcane by hand, and it's almost identical. It is possible these days to harvest sugarcane using machines, but these fields were all laid out during the age of slavery, so it's difficult to get the machines in here, and then still have to come into these fields with machetes and cut the cane by hand. These guys are workers in a state-owned industry. They're relatively well paid, they're relatively well looked after. But to me, slavery and sugar are so intertwined that it's disturbing to see sugarcane being harvested. It just is so interwoven with the idea of slavery and the brutality of slavery. It's hard to imagine this as a 21st century scene in a 21st century industry. Everything about it belongs in the 18th century. The steel barges that even have oxen that pull the barges. Hearing these sounds, seeing these scenes, it seems like the rebirth, the ghosts of the slaves who worked these fields are still with us. Adam is 29, is a cooper. Thomas, 33, carpenter. Simon, 41, field hand. Lavinia, 36, Thomas.
Okay, so that was the work in the fields, all right? Now we're going to look at the work in the factory, all right? And you understand why a lot of people died, okay, in the whole process of the work. So he's let me just go back just one little second. So so he was in the Wales plantation in Guyana, which still is in operation. Okay. Now he's going to St. Nicholas Abbey in Barbados. Okay. To a sugar factory there. Cane was being put through the roller, you know, the big heavy roller. The guy's hand was on the roller. Anybody notice that? I think it was like about 425.
Yeah, I saw the guy hand there at the roller.
Okay.
That's dangerous.
It is very, people got let me just put it back on 425. People, it's about yeah, right here. You see,
sugar juice.
Yeah.
Okay.
The crop
People,
imposed a time pressure.
That was a common way of men getting injured back in the day, right? They would be tired and, you know, working overtime, put their hand on, and next thing you know, they're in their hand being pulled in that roller, yeah? Or even falling into that pit, that copper you saw them boiling the sugar. Men tired, men overworked. You see?
Yeah,
so
but then that will spoil the whole crop.
Yeah.
It's like fermenting will spoil the whole batch.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
One person's hand getting in there will spoil the whole batch too, so that will be counterproductive.
Yeah, you know. So it was part of the process. Anyway, so the eternal question in my mind, okay, is how does a small number of people exert such oppressive dominance on a much larger group of people? Okay? If you really check it, this was the population statistics for Barbados from 1640 to 1700. And you could see a tremendous demographic shift. Okay? So in 1644, you had 800 Africans and about 29,200 Europeans, Britishers. Okay? It was pretty much on par about 16 years afterwards, okay, as the importation of Africans picked up. And then they realized that 40 years later, they had about 3 times the amount of African people. than European people, because several left for South Carolina and Virginia and elsewhere. Okay, some went back to England. All right, but the Africans had nowhere to go really. Okay, right, and of course the cane production needed a lot of people. So how was it possible then that this small group of people controlled such a larger group of people, right? Larger number of people. Well, here are some of the reasons I came up with. Well, for one thing, the slaveholder maintained absolute control over the enslaved, all right, using the whip. Okay, so the continual crack of the whip remained an audible threat to enslaved workers to keep at their work. Right, so pretty much in every picture from that time, okay, that you see white folks and black folks, the white person will always have a whip, always. Okay, check that out. Okay, I found that very remarkable. Okay, then of course there was punishment. Okay, so the right of the master to punish his enslaved African people without consequence was also enshrined in law. Look at this guy, Peter Gordon. Okay, Peter Gordon is iconic in American history, for those of you guys who are not aware. Okay, Peter Gordon was an enslaved African on a South Carolina plantation, cotton plantation. And during the War of Independence, the Civil War between the South and the North, Gordon went into or found his way into a Union camp. Okay, that's Lincoln's people, all right? They were amazed, they were shocked at the state of his back. Okay, so much so that they recorded it. All right, from whipping. Okay, what is remarkable about this story, from the guy who told it, was the reaction of the other Africans who were present. They went about their business as if it was normal. Okay, that was their reaction because this was common. You see what I'm saying? So they had no visceral reaction to it when they saw his back, because that's what it was, right? So this whole business was enshrined in the law, and we'll talk about that in a second, including things like amputation, disfiguring, and branding. Okay, torturous executions for the ones who were so rebellious that they wanted to overthrow the whole system were executed, all right? And those who were accused of collaborating, and accused here is the interesting word, okay? Not necessarily found guilty, all you need to be is accused, you understand? So anyway, let's proceed. So they also use divide and rule tactics, okay? So you privilege some people on the plantation to the disadvantage of some other people. So basically you had three categories of people, okay? In terms of the African workers, you had the field workers and you had the skilled men, okay? The skilled workers were afforded many more privileges than the field workers, okay? Skilled workers, they got better food, they got more food, they got better clothing, they got more clothing. Okay, they got better and bigger housing. Okay, and this is important. All right. There was always the prospect that when the plantation owner died, that he would set them free in his will. Often that didn't happen because he would bequeath these people to his surviving relatives, to his sons, to his children, to his wife. Okay, and we will come to that as well. Okay. So also, and then there was also a possibility of being baptized in the church. You see what I'm saying? Because when you are now a Christian, right, you are now esteemed. Okay. So according to the CARICOM Reparations Commission, there is evidence that those who won the favor of white managers and who avoided field work cherished those advantages. You know, because you're getting licked all day and all of a sudden you're getting better food, better housing, better clothes, and so on. Okay, there's an example. I found one slave in Barbados even killed his successor and then committed suicide when the white manager stripped him of his work as a watchman. You see? So you had this contention even within the African population who getting better treatment over who. And this was a deliberate ploy, really, that the plantation owners used to keep people apart. Okay?
Roger?
Yes?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How different is that to society today, where you have the same thing happening? Skilled workers, qualified people are better rewarded than unskilled.
But remember the context in which all of this thing is happening, right? There's,
I understand the context that it is a system of ownership and brutality. But if slavery is a reflection of society today, when you were talking about breaking people and I forget it too, but what came to mind? No, not buck breaking. Is when they
seasoning.
Yeah. What came to mind immediately was the military, especially the Marines, where people come in as civilians and when they rewrite their whole personality.
I hear you. That's a good point.
So,
Raja?
Yes, that's right.
When you also mentioned seasoning, the first thought came to mind is what's happening today in China with the yogurts. They're being seasoned.
Okay. You mean mentally conditioned?
Mentally conditioned and all that. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. But, the brutality answer didn't finish there, right? There was a lot more to come. I hope you guys have a good constitution for all of this.
But
Roger, in the United States, is this kind of similar to what they used to call, quote unquote, the house Negroes versus the field Negroes?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, because I don't know that there was like big processing going on with cotton. I just pick the cotton and they send the cotton somewhere else. So pretty much you were field workers and domestic workers, pretty much. Now in the sugarcane plantation context, you have field workers and then you have, all these people like the coppers who deal with turning the sugar and the carpenters and, all of these different skills that people had. Okay.
Now, one other question, I don't want to get you off topic, but do you know why they chose sugarcane for the Caribbean and cotton for the United States?
No, I have no idea, except to say that from last week, okay, cotton was, Africans were taken from, the west coast of Africa and taken to places like Cape Verde, okay, for their tropical agricultural skills, as well as their skills in other things like cotton, like cloth manufacturing and so on, using cotton. Okay, and if you go back to last week's presentation, you will see that the Cape Verdeans and so on still use some of the same techniques that they used back then to produce cloth. Okay, so
they also grew sugarcane in Louisiana. So it wasn't singular to the Caribbean, and they did it in Barbados as well. So in South America, but they did it in sugarcane was grown in Louisiana also.
Yeah, also in Trinidad they would have grown cotton in a big way on Shaka Shaka Reef, for instance. And like in Antigua, they still have a little bit of cotton. You know the term Sea Island cotton? Yeah, so there are some places in the Caribbean that had small cotton. And I guess it's just the United States won out just because of bigger land area and economies of scale.
Okay.
Like cotton disappeared from the Caribbean.
Yeah, and so
go
let me just
ahead,
add a little bit. So Orson, I think that in response to your question, that's what the market wanted at that time. So the Europeans were getting a sweeter palate and they wanted sugar. They were already seeing that India was producing cloth that was fine cloth. They were demolishing the Indian industry, and the cotton gin kind of industrial era was starting up in Europe. So they also needed cotton. I think that cotton, sugarcane, and tobacco was tried everywhere that the plantations owners could have tried it. And depending on what grew best, they would have worked with it, as well as what they preferred to work in with the ships that they would have been working with too. And then cocoa and coffee were also tried, right?
Just one point quickly. You got to remember that the islands of the Caribbean were the jewels in the crown of many of these European countries. Okay, so Barbados, okay, because of its sugar production, was the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. Okay, Haiti, all right, was the crown, the jewel in the crown of Napoleon and the French people. You see, because, you know, Haiti produced 40% of the world's sugar at that time, you know. So, I mean, these places, these little islands in the Caribbean for hundreds of years were more important than what was going on in the US, right? Which was generally, I think, considered as a backwater place, basically. All right? Okay, moving on. Okay, so this divide and rule tactics between workers was something they used. Also, they exploited people's tribal differences. Okay, so it was a general policy to have a mixture of enslaved people from different groups. You see, so when they went on to the ship, right, they looked for different people. You see, so if I know I have a lot of Yoruba on my plantation, I'm going to look for other people, you know, Igbo and, you know, Kru and other types of people. And why was that? Why was it important to look for other people? Well, to balance off one group against the next, okay, to be sure of having 2/3 of the people on the plantation join with the whites in the event of an uprising, to ensure that one African nation, one group of people, right, would refuse to join the rebellion led by another group of people. Okay, whether they are, you know, born here, okay, or from the continent. Okay, another deliberate strategy on these plantation owners' part. Okay.
Hey, Roger,
all right, truth, yes.
What I think seems logical is that if you have people from the same part of Africa, they could communicate with each other. So if you have people from several different parts, they cannot communicate in a language that the white man can't understand.
Okay, now remember, you know, Africa is a big place with a lot of different people in the same country now, okay? So, you know, you had a whole heap of different people speaking a lot of different languages and so on. Okay, some in common, some not. All right, through sexual violence, of course, all right? So sexual abuse was a defining feature of this system. All right, the vast majority of victims, of course, were women. Okay, however, the abuse of men by other men took place, as well as the abuse of men by women and women by women. Okay, now, yeah, you were in a Puritan time, yes, but remember, people still have their attitudes, right, whether hidden or in the open. Okay. So fundamentally, sexual exploitation was more about physical gratification, was about more, than physical gratification, was about power. Okay, so rape and sexual abuse are tools of violence humiliation. Okay, because when a man comes for your wife, right? I mean, and you are powerless to do anything about it. You know, that was general situation. Okay, they fully embraced the philosophy that Black lives do not matter. You see what I'm saying? Right? Even back then, it was more pronounced then. So many Europeans had adopted the pervasive attitude of indifference towards the lives of enslaved Africans and their families. All right, so I'm going to play for you about 2 minutes of sound from Sarah Koja. Okay, she was one of the last slaves in the United States. Okay, her testimony was recorded in the 1930s. Okay, some 50 years or so after the emancipation of the slaves in the United States. Okay, this is what she says, or part of what she says about life back when she was a younger woman. It's here we go.
One none of the slaves off on our plantation ever sold, but the ones on the other plantation of Moss Williams was. Oh, that was a terrible time. All the slaves be in the field, plowing, hoeing, singing in the boiling sun. Old Moss, he come through the field with a man called the speculator. They walk around just looking. All the darkies know what this means. They didn't dare look up, just walk right on. Then the speculator, he see who he want. He talked on Moss, then he slaps the handcuffs on him, tack him away to the cotton country. Oh, them was awful times. When the speculator was ready to go with the slaves, if there was any who didn't want to go, he thrash 'em, then tie 'em behind the wagon and make 'em run till they fall on the ground. Then he thrash 'em till they say they go without no trouble. Sometimes some of them run away and come back to the plantation. Then it was harder on them than before. When the darkies went to dinner, the old nigger mama, she say, "Where am such and such?" None of the others want to tell her. But when she see them look down to the ground, she just say, "The speculator, the speculator." Then the tears roll down her cheeks. 'Cause maybe her son or husband, and she knows she never see him again.
Okay, so this person called the speculator, okay, it's very pervasive in U.S. slavery, but it also happened in the Caribbean as well, in places like Cuba and Jamaica and so on, okay? But this person, basically an internal slave trader, okay, will show up, okay, and negotiate with the owner of the plantation for X, Y, and Z, okay? Regardless of whether that person has children, regardless of whether he has a wife or whatever, okay? And just like that, he's taken elsewhere, never to be seen again, all right? And this is what happened, okay? All right, moving on. Okay, so I said to you all just now that all of this stuff was engraved in law, okay? All of it